During this set, we have two poets, two modest men with a lot to be immodest about. Both poets have worked very hard for the commonwealth and benefit of other poets in their respective communities. Gerard Smyth is the poetry editor for the Irish Times. But before he took on that position, he was many years the editor of the Irish Times Weekend Supplement, and his presence at that helm ensured that the Irish Times Weekend Supplement had a very strong commitment to literature and to poetry in particular. And when he was younger, he was a weekly reviewer of poetry in that paper. And many of us appreciate how rare it is to have a paper that's committed to reviewing poetry books week by week. Tomica Bajsić is translation editor of the journal Poezija, which even since Yugoslav times into the present is the most influential and significant poetry journal in all of the Balkans. He works with the Croatian Writers Society, and he's very active in working not just for Croatian poets, but for introducing foreign poets to Croatia, either through translation or through invitation to do readings there when they can. He's been explaining to me recently the difficulties they're facing with government cutbacks in funding. It's something that's affecting us all. Tomica Bajsić is he's made a living as a fresco restorer, as a mural painter. In his student days, he travelled to cities around Europe and got by sketching people. He's a creative polymath. He's a graphic designer by profession. When he was a teenager in his early 20s, he was a sports parachutist, and that skill led him, whether he liked it or not, into an elite parachute regiment with the Croatian army. He fought in the War of Independence, was wounded twice, severely enough to be hospitalised and operated on. So people talk about how the lives of an infantryman is mostly that of boredom. Tomica's experience is not that. I've never met, by temperament, personality and character, never met a man who appears to be more unsuited to the role of warrior. He's one of the gentlest, kindest men I've ever met. His first book of poetry related his experience in the war, but it would be unfair to him to call him a war poet because he writes about so much else. But he has written some of the most terrifying war poems of this century so far. Gerard Smyth is a poet who has published for the last 47 years, beginning in journals. He's published many collections. He's a poet who believes that poetry is a perfect vehicle for memorializing people and places. Very much, he's a poet from Dublin and of Dublin. He loves celebrating Dublin. He's not only written about Dublin in his own work, but he's edited a major anthology of Dublin poetry and song. I'm really looking forward to hearing each of them here tonight. And as with most of the readings, we're going to hear them in alphabetical order. Tomica will come up and read first. Thank you.
Good evening, dear people. It is my first time in Ireland, and I'm very happy to be part of this distinguished festival in Cork. And I'm thankful to Patrick Cotter that he invited me here. I haven't been in Ireland, never, but I have read a lot and seen a lot, read a lot of poetry. So, in a way, Irish culture, literature was always somewhere near me. Since this evening, this festival mentions Saudi Arabian poet Saudi poet Ashraf Fayed, who was sentenced to death. So in Saudi Arabia, the Palestinian poet who was sentenced to death in Saudi Arabia, we have the big event in Zagreb on 14th of January to his honor, to for life of Ashraf Fayed. Big readings, and I would like to read one. First, I would read one poem that is related to the refugees that we all have. It speaks about refugees from some other part of the world, some 20 years ago, that I wrote some time before, but I will read it first because it's something that is in Croatia. It's very current, the thing with refugees. I will read all the poems in English, in our Slavic kind of English that we all read, that you can see in the movies, the villains in the spy movies. They all speak in Slavic English. So the first one that I will be read, it would be in Croatian, and then I will read in English. Buđenje proljeća. Svjetski je dan poezije. Dan kada je bolje ne susresti pjesnike. Izlazim s labradoricom Lunom u park. Jedan žuti leptir u ime prvog dana proljeća crta svoju putanju slobode od zemlje do neba. Izgleda mi kao da smo svi sačinjeni od sunca, iako ostaje nevidljivo kako nastaje poezija svijeta. Kao taj leptirov crtež u zraku, za kojeg ne znaš ni da li je tu, već ga nema. The monarch butterfly, also known in Australia as wanderer butterfly, is quite prevalent in Australia today. There are, however, reports of monarch butterfly in Australia before 1871. So how did it get here? The wanderer butterfly. Beyond coral reefs, a deserted sea, where a light breeze and the bird in the sky announce the longed-for land of scuba diving harmony. It is where Vietnamese bamboo rafts cross the ocean in search of bread, and when they see a butterfly, they remember forever each of its pores, breathing in spouting colors, because that means the land is near, and they are not going to drown or die of thirst. There, beyond the seabed of petrified lava, lies Australia. I will read now one poem that relates to 10th of July in 1993. It was the second year of the war in Croatia, War of Independence, and then I enlisted as a student of third year of Arts Academy, volunteered, and then the second year of the war, I was from the 91st, all the time engaged, and the second year was already behind the people on the front. Already the corruption started. The factories was privatized to the people from formal way around. Workers left jobs. It was like it was a big robbery behind. Started like even second year of the war out behind the front lines. And in that time I was leading a reconnaissance unit in the mountainous region called Lika. And then every time I went after the reconnaissance, sometimes we went to behind the enemy lines or in the no man's land, and I had to write reports. So I was wounded that time, but I haven't written later just a report, but I have written a poem report about what happened there. The wounded man is tempting God. I wandered around the forest of the enemy kingdom and stumbled upon a piece of wire hidden in the grass. It was a buried prompt to tripwire activated, bounding anti-personal mine. And in the split second before the explosion, I wanted God to make that cup pass me by. But when the detonation threw me into the air, I saw pieces of iron, pieces of my uniform, pieces of my flesh whirling in orbit. Sand, stars, porcelain, four winds, tartan, razors, ice. Joseph Conrad proposing to Freya, the girl from the Seven Islands. My enemy's cats stealing the planet oxygen, digging through garbage. All lighthouses ablaze all the way from the New Hebrides to the Pepper Coast. The president of Zimbabwe, Colonel Banana, listening to the German radio. Thousands of mummified fish heads prophesying in alien tongues. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart making airplanes out of the piece of the paper. I never liked Mozart, and that's what threw me down on the ground, while the Vienna boys choir sang. A jug goes to the water until it breaks. A jug goes to the water until it breaks. God, let that cup pass me by, I thought there in the ambulance. Let me live for a little bit longer, at least for another 100 years. I don't want to die now that our time has come. I wanted my medals to shine like oil platforms lighting up the night flows over the Atlantic, and my veterans' charisma to become electric. Let my limousine slide through the crowd like Moby Dick, slip before the eyes of helpless Captain Ahab. I never said I didn't want to sell my soul. I was only negotiating the price. Let me be invited at the presidential party. There are so many dishes I have never tasted. There are so many people on this earth whose destiny I never took in my hands. I want to rob and preach to the robbed ones. I want to lie and laugh at the deceived ones. I want my place in the ark so I can watch the flood with a cocktail glass in my hands. Since it is better to set fires than to be burned, it is better to humiliate than to be humiliated. So let's lay all the cards on the table. We have but one life. Give me 100 cannibal horse from Borneo. Let me recover myself in the purifying fountains of youth. Give me power to last forever like the invisible poison in the veins of all humans. Give me parts of their spines, hands, eyes, brains, hearts, kidneys. My hands are the hands of the sculptor thirsty for a work. I'll smile at you, the green pastures of Croatia, with a smile of a harvester. In front of the hospital, Ellie cuts rummage through garbage. They have conspired to steal the oxygen of the entire planet. The iron holders on the facade are empty. 50 years ago, 3 flags hung there. One for the gluttony, another one for greed, and the third one for misery. Instead of them, we hoisted up our tricolor. The red is for the Christ mineral blood, the blood of our dead, the guardian subterranean blood boiling. The white is for the hope that we are fighting for a better civilization. The blue one is for our blazing adventure, for friendship firm as those overseas telegraph cables that fishermen sometimes find when their nets get lost somewhere really deep. But the cats came overnight and did a dirty trick. So the red stands for gluttony once again, the white for greed, and the blue for misery. So dear friends, one thing is certain. Those very cats are the guardians of that other world as well. These cunning cats that sometimes transform into politicians, the cats that are still rummaging through garbage, conspiring to steal the oxygen of the entire planet. Patrick mentioned that I used to draw portraits, so I studied in the Art Academy, and then it was just before the war. We took a few months, and I was in London and then in Amsterdam. It was near before the Easter, and I was making the portraits on the Adam Square. And then we saw the papers, the crisis in the Yugoslav presidency, and the Milosevic drums of war. The Yugoslav National Army prepared for things for much to Croatia, so we had to hurry home, and it's called, this poem is called, I think it was published in the 100 years of anthology of 100 years of war poetry in Bladax. The Great Gates of War, for Davor Sepic, my friend who was there with me. We drove 2,000 miles all across Europe in our old golden boy, Robbie's old cadet. The three of us smoking, listening to the radio. Long arrows of light stretched along the wet road. Miles piled behind us, and night emerges. We stop only to change the wheel, continuing on, drinking, smoking, listening to the radio. That's how we meet the daylight. The sky expands, and you are saying, 40 years, that's just about right. I don't need more, that's long enough for one life. Shortly afterward, a tank grenade near Dubrovnik will take you up into the atmosphere. You have lived 23 years instead of 40. 7 years ago, we had driven relentlessly all across Europe, up to that Chetnik roadblock at Plitvice Lakes. It was Easter, and we passed through the great gates of war. In your only photograph, taken in uniform, you have a curious look, as if you can see what's coming ahead. On the wall above you, a flash of white light coming from the spirit, its ever-presence. Today at lunch, we had a discussion about dictators who wrote poetry. So many dictators wrote poetry, so it was like about dictators and poetry. And I have this one poem called Dictators. It is about dictators, and they're not their poetry, but their followers. So I come from the East Europe, where we raise dictators. We have this temperature, which is very good for these plants to flourish. Dictators. Dictators are marching like figures in mechanical circles. That merry-go-round is not inspired by electric or some other artificial energy. It is fueled by our own will, or rather, the lack of will. Dictators get dethroned because of fatigue of material, or they get eaten by their own kind. They even kill themselves sometimes, or they perish in calm sweetness of old age. But it is our greed that recycles them. They are impersonated by the hopes that we have failed to accomplish in our own youth. I wish to read one longer poem, a little bit poem longer, so I have to take some water. It's called Gaspard of the Night, Art History Revisited, and Gaspard of the Night was very influential symbolist, surrealist book in French by Aloysius Bertrand. When I studied Art Academy, it was also springtime, and my professor of art history was a very harsh fellow, and he was a little bit of a dictator himself. Matko Peć was his name, and he wrote files about every student, where they come from, where they burned, where their parents come from, how tall they are, something like this, everything, and he kept it in his room. He was always locking his room, and he was drawing the watercolors, but nobody saw these watercolors. And then he was a heavy drinker, so that he was very harsh towards the students. But when he had these lessons, he always talked about these painters from the golden era of Paris, like Picasso, Braque, Modigliani, how he was there. So he was talking, and he said this, and he went there, and I said this, and he said, so he was like the part of all these painters. So it was very funny. But he was younger, he couldn't be there in this time, but he was making like he was there, and he was painting. And then I was looking to the window that day, because it was very beautiful tree. There was very beautiful tree, and there was flowers in the tree. Nice day, sunny. And he told me, what you are looking through the window, why do you are not listening what I'm saying? There is nothing there outside the window. You are a lunatic, he said to me, that I'm lunatic, because I'm looking through the window. And then he dropped me out of the class. He expelled me from the class. And then I went to the nearby bar of the academy, and came inside. It was very dark. And I said, I'm expelled from the art history class. Who will buy me a bitter pen? And I heard a voice in the dark, I will. And it was one girl with dark hair. And so we sat and spoke together. And she told me that she started painting and then started graphics. She wanted to study painting because in secondary school in former Yugoslavia, a teacher, she made a drawing of the lion, but she made a drawing of the lion with green fur. And the teacher took this drawing and placed it on the panel to see how it's not good to draw lions, because there are no lions in the world that have green skin. So it was the mockery panel for her. So she was ashamed. And then she said, I have to study. And she learned to paint good, and she started painting. And she later became my wife. And we are married, and we have 3 children. So that's that's my story. That's a love story. But the poem it's devoted to this professor, because he was a heavy drinker, and I found him in this, and I wrote this poem, Art History Revisited, Art Class History Revisited. Gaspard of the Night. Let someone else explain who Gaspard of the Night was, that horrible creature of the abyss, the vapor of the brassy mold in wine cellars, where only artificial light shines. I don't want to read a poem bearing his name, nor do I want to know its author, or the period he belongs to. It's France, okay, but I couldn't care less what came before or after this or that. Let him just disappear from the library shelves. If he is still somewhere there collecting dust and being eaten by worms. He had those extraordinary visions. Fine, many a prophet has them. Baudelaire gave him body, and Maurice Ravel packed him inside his slippery nose. But that was some 100 years ago. Don't pull him out of the storage of forgotten wishes, or out of the penniless Vivi house, but rather forget him for the sake of future generations. Unfortunately, I met him by chance, but not in a book or in a poem or through his author, but personally, the dark Gaspard himself. However, it is Gaspard of the Night, the disappeared one, who interests me here. So don't mention Gaspard to anyone, for he belongs to those whose ideas are a mere mirage, a water-soaked, unpaid bill whereon blue ink dances its mechanic dance on the table in some inn. Though I didn't read him, I know that under his light all glasses and bottles elongate like those maiden faces on Modigliani's paintings. The chairs are piled up like Apollinaire's calligrams. While salty sardines are being served on turpentine, as the folk debate endlessly what is better, goose feeder or aqua ink, as they produce empty canvases like travel maps of pilgrims. Understanding Gaspard of the Night means realizing that all those multidimensional cuts and appearances in cubist paintings represent the lawyers of underskirts of those party girls, suspended in drunken flight. Look at all those half-top hats and sticks made of ballistic glass, climbing at dawn into a carriage, driven by an old man in a long overcoat or wrapped in a cloak, black patch covering his eye. The parrot he wears on his shoulder once plucked his eye out, but he still refuses to renounce it, for sudden injuries and illnesses are the stamp of true art. The wheels, reinforced with iron ring, roll, or even better, rotate down the cobbled stones, occasionally flickering, as the stripped chimneys on the horizon carve themselves into the sky. That's how the Italian futurism came into being. Whereas Impressionism was created one afternoon out of pure leisure, accompanied with a glass of quality wine, made of pollen that wind receives from birches and linen. Expressionism, on the other hand, cut a bit deeper into the sawdust of bars frequented by Gaspard and his kind. Surrealism resorted to quarrel to unite stubborn people, while Dadaism entirely ignored the palpable world outside of Gaspard's realm. Fauvists and their jeering colors stand for the rebellious cry of an individual shut behind the doors of an asylum for the disturbed ones. Whereas Malevich's Ride of the Red Cavalry had been painted in flux, seemingly pouring out of the barrel of red wine, which is also the trace of Gaspard of the Night. Because of him, Gauguin left for Tahiti, moonlighting in his wooden clogs, disturbing the sleep of honest folk. Answering to his debtors' urgent telegrams in incomprehensible Polynesian language, for the first people to whom he now belonged did not know of usurious contracts. Marc Chagall went grey from worrying about Gaspard. Figures floating above the canvas and the vistas of the wide Russian winter merged unexpectedly with violet and green bottle-like colors. His painting growing narrower and narrower with fewer and fewer figures as he himself grew more and more frugal. Where there used to be 3 animals, now you could spot only 1. Where the whole house would fit inside a single window frame, as the church is reduced to a belfry. Delaunay's paintings, replete with light seeping in through the shutters, represent the view from inside the rib cage of a human body stumbling exhausted from all that burden. Gaspard of the night, like the life of the art created under his cloak, belongs to that daring and unique part of synchronized time. All those artists with their different visions, who but Gaspard could bring them together? I don't even know who wrote it. I never read it. But to me, Gaspard of the Night is that what John Barleycorn was to Jack London, and Apollinaire also called him out when he named his book of verse Alcohol. Good. I think do I pass 20 minutes, yes? Have I passed 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much for
I want to begin by thanking Pat and Jennifer for the invitation to be at this terrific festival, and also want to thank Emily for her assistance through the week at the workshop. Pat won't want me to say this, but there are many unsung heroes in the Irish art scene, and he is one of them. Continuing to keep the flame alive for poetry and the short story, and in the last few years very much against the odds given the difficulties of state funding. He kind of made my heart skip a beat when he said I'd been publishing for 47 years. I know he got his sums wrong, but actually he has them absolutely right.
I was relying on an Irish Times article.
Got to be right, so. Going to get this poem out of the way with apologies to those here who have been at the workshop, coming in driven by passion and positivity about poetry, but I think we are allowed moments of self-doubt and loss of faith, particularly over 47 years. Odds and ends. Have I pissed away a life writing poems, chasing those sonnets, waiting on street corners for an image to pass and stumble into my arms? Was it all a cure for boredom, a kind of servitude, a rapture since school days when I swore allegiance to metaphors and symbols? Year after year, the hoard increased, like the pyramids and towering heaps in the scrapyard, the odds and ends in the second-hand shop. Possessions no longer possessed, blemished objects time has blessed, old relics of kitchen and parlour, old treasures that have lost their sparkle. Pat mentioned my, I suppose, identification with Dublin, where I was born, and I've lived all my life, and which has been a constant theme in my work. I've sometimes been a little irritated by the focus of reviewers on only the Dublin poems, and the late Dennis O'Driscoll always chastised me and said, it's good to have a calling card. But my wise editor, when I was doing my last collection, said, I think we have to sever you from that. For this book anyway, and which is why the poem is called A Song of Elsewhere. The title came before the poem, and I felt it had to happen. I'm very grateful for Google Map, because this is a sort of a journey of the imagination, a song of elsewhere. How close they are in the age of Google Map, the roads to Athens and Alexanderplatz, the ancient cathedrals of Italy and France, the vineyards and fig orchards along the Camino track, Prague's moody perspective of statues and bridges, Ljubljana, where the exit signs are riddles, Venice, its artistry and splendour, and numerous ways to arrive at the same moment twice, its light fluorescing the Doge's palace and gilding the delta. How close they are in the age of Google Map, the places where we land and disembark, the cities of nomads, Babylonian crowds, on inland hills, at the edge of sea mist, where district lines and exhausted rivers divide the destinations of the poor and rich. Michael, on another elsewhere place, Michael Cody referred earlier to his routing around a cemetery in Paris, and a few years ago I had the privilege of spending some weeks there, and I spent a lot of time in Montparnasse. In fact, one of my fellow residents in the Irish College said to me, it's a case of the living haunting the dead. I had long ago been a great admirer of the work of the Peruvian poet Villeco, and someone had told me that Villeco was one of the residents in Montparnasse, and it took me some time to actually find his grave, which was just behind Beckett, looking for Villeco. Among the monuments, they still mourn for Serge and do a sentimental dance. Those women who keep the flowers fresh and drop the ash from cigarettes upon the grave that is now his mask. But you, Villeco, you too were there on the map of the dead, but I could not find you in your corner of Division 12. Twice I came, on Sunday morning, then in Thursday rain, through the iron gates into your season of repose, where you, cut loose from all maladies and discord, the martyrdoms of blood and brute force, were there on the map of the dead. There, since Good Friday broke your lease on life, your last sunrise, last chance to throw the eternal dice, dip your pen in ink, and write the changes to that poem of conjuration. Serge is Serge Gainsborough, and actually there were women dancing around his grave. For the year that's in it, the anniversary year, I'll read this poem called Disillusionment. I suppose it expresses what was a personal mood, shared by many, I think, at the time that this country had to sell its sovereignty to bail out the banks, and in doing so abandoned certain ideals of its founders. Disillusionment. We have seen it at the head of the march, seen it dance, seen it dangle, the flag the south wind catches. It is part of the pomp, pageant fodder, the billowy tricolour hoisted in honour of the seven back from Purda: Plunkett, Clark, McDermott, Kant, Connolly, Pearse, MacDonagh. It is the flag they carry when the state pays homage with drums, salutes, and rhetoric less honest than the men it praises, Tone and Davis, and whoever else is still remembered when they lay a wreath for all the dead beside the monument, under the epitaph, for those who, if they reappeared to form a circle, would see a time of yearning, the consequence of sorry days, Eragean stables, but no Hercules to clean them. And Asher, this is Cork, so I'll read this poem. Theo Dorgan edited an anthology based on objects in the National Museum. So we were all sent off to see what we'd choose. I spent hours looking at torcs and ancient objects, and then went down to the other branch of the museum. This was Kildare Street. I went down to Collins Barracks and into the 1916 room. And there were two objects in that room of clothing which had a powerful presence. One was James Connolly's shirt with the blood stain, and the other was Michael Collins' coat. And Collins won. The Collins coat. Look at it now, the great coat worn by him in the cloud weather of the south, in the assassin's gimlet view. Imagine this, the sway and swish of it, harp buttons a-glitter, as he made his way through the hiss of enmities, clenched fists, the whispered and shouted oaths of allegiance. Hard shoulders, long sleeves, fit for the arms he raised at the monster meetings or when he was ready to sign on the dotted line death warrants, treaties. Thick wool of military green, worn into shape by a nation builder's girth. The cut of it, a clear outline, filling its own glass shrine. And so it became his shroud, this mantle, garment, sagging weight of collar and hem, with pockets that once held the wiles of war and peace, the gun in politics. It's almost Valentine's Day, so I'll read a love poem called Cool of the Day. It was an evening for the mowing of lawns, the clipping of hedgerows. Not staying indoors with the soap opera, the idiot's quiz, or watching CNN for news of the next apocalypse. My companion was sitting in blue jeans in the walled garden, sipping a wine of Burgundy that was close to a menstrual colour, enjoying the best weather in weeks, indolent heat of an Indian summer. Her face has always been the iconography of my best dreams, my gladness, my rapture, my golden apple. In the walled garden, she was chatting away, her necklace of pearls, the mother-to-daughter heirloom she wears, as cool as the cool of the day. This is also, I suppose, a kind of love poem. Previous readings when I read it, it has resonated with the partners and spouses of poets. It's called arrears. When it comes to love, I am in arrears. So much has been given but not returned that I must seek forgiveness for my disappearing act to that room where I waited for the other muse. Forgiveness too for unspoken words, long silences to the evenings of our wedded lives, my inwardness, my absences, even when I was there at the kitchen table, in the fireside chair, not down to earth but gone from it in a deeper rapture than the meditation trance of a stoic mystic. This is a two-part poem from what I think the American poet Ted Kruser calls the country of memory. They are, I suppose, the other evening here, a much younger poet read what she called a disco poem, and this is my disco poem, but I think the musical references in it dates it to a particular era. And the second part of it, I suppose, is a memory of kind of after closing time, Saturday nights when the objective was always to sort of gate crash a party somewhere, usually in Flatland, which was around the Rathmines area of Dublin. The poem is called Dancing in the Attic, and it's in memory of a friend from that time who died recently, in memory of Anne Bryan. It might have been called the Kingdom of Heaven, that discotheque in attic space that was the heartbeat of the night. A crowd of strangers dancing with strangers. The atmosphere so dimly lit it was hard to find a face among the girls with airs and graces and the Johnny-come-latelys, hands in their pockets, backs to the wall. Same as always, in faded jeans and check shirts hanging loose, we wandered in, hearkening to Martha Reeves. Sometimes the beat of Born on the Bayou. On the stroke of 12, the music stops, the DJ pulls the plug, house lights come on, so metallic and bright they could be searchlights looking for escapees along the Berlin Wall. 2. In a 60s dive, a 60s turntable was spinning the vinyl. The poet from Montreal saluted the Sisters of Mercy. The troubadour from Minnesota was pitying the poor immigrant. To pass the boredom, girls were dancing wildly, humming the chorus of a song from Merseyside. It was a place to go on Saturday night to slake a thirst, tie a love knot, or to find a consolation. A 60s dive, a house divided into rooms of homely exile, dull surroundings of plywood and formica, but beckoning with its blandishments, German wine, homebrew, apple cider. These are some newer poems. I once lived in a building of flats, we called them, and it was on the first floor, and the stairs were wooden, so you knew when everyone else was coming and going. No one could kind of sneak in, creaky stairs and slamming doors, and so no one moved past our door without knowing, and this is called an apparition. The rooms were damp and the windows let in drafts, but for years I kept the key long after the door was gone. Neighbours from upper floors hurried down and up the stairs, feet as thunderous as Apollo's steeds, heavy-booted, late for work, or carrying home their load of grievances. For years I kept the key long after the door was gone, when the rooms from top to bottom were empty of possessions, the tenants' names forgotten, except the one who lit a match to guide her through the dark on nights when she was late returning from a dance, the flame held close to make her face an apparition. I don't know how many of you might have read the American poet Jack Gilbert, but a few years ago a chorus of voices kept telling me that you must read Jack Gilbert. Now, I was a latecomer to Gilbert's work, was unaware of him, but it's amazing, someone mentions somebody and then a lot of people start talking about that writer or individual. And in a bookshop in Gorey, I actually came across a copy of his poems, second-hand copy, into which someone had written, "This is the poet's most quiet book." On finding a copy of Jack Gilbert's poems, on the first page, someone had written that this was the poet's most quiet book. I opened it, and yes, there was a hush, as eerie as a wartime truce. In the white rooms of Greece, Italy's backcountry villages, and Japanese gardens on the hills of Kyoto, the poet was a traveller in nomad's sandals, who seemed to know that inside every language there are words that need to be untangled. the proverbs from the jokes, riddles from the secret code, the lullaby from the lament. Words that comfort those who mourn should not stand next to words of praise for the beauty of the bridesmaids or the newly born. Between the joyous verse and sad refrain, the blessing and the curse, the blasphemy and pious chant, there must be silence, a pause to suggest the shades of difference between one word and the next. The ability of actors to step into and out of moments it amazes me, and I have a lot of actor friends. It's a wonderful gift. And I remember meeting an actress after she had performed Antigone, which is a very intense, demanding role, and it struck me that this moment of transition, when she went back to being herself, was quite an extraordinary one, and it must also work the other way. Antigone, her fake wounds have disappeared. She swaps the robes of ancient Greece for a pair of fashionable jeans. Backstage, Antigone is like everyone else, fixes her hair, glosses her lips, dismisses the psychobabble of the theatre critics. She checks her loose change for the bus, remembers what she forgot to put on her supermarket shopping list. Earlier, on a stage rinsed in blood, bad things happened in a chain of events with no deliverance. There was no pardon for what she did, the transgression she committed, the act of sisterly love. This is a Dublin poem called Where Eros Met His Aphrodite. And really it's an evocation, I suppose, of a time. It's kind of, the first line gives it away, in a different kind of city to the one that we have now. But it's also a kind of an homage to one particular location in the city, which was a place of rendezvous for many of us, Cleary's Clock, which is still there. Cleary's mightn't be, but the clock is. And I've used an epigraph from Philip Levine, the American poet. This place can break your heart. The Arabs and the Jews were halfway through a 6-day war. All we could do was hope the scaremongers were wrong, that the soothsayers had not seen what they thought they saw. Horses in the Saturday steeplechase had names like Wind in the Gap. Sunday was the day of ease. On Monday, the shirts and sheets and aprons hung in the drying breeze of little backyards. Still in their 50s hats, all the men had smoker's cough. The women gazed like window cats at neighbours on the warpath. At the end of afternoon, the newsboys and news vendors held aloft the news and shouted loud enough to shake the corners where they stood. It was a city of damp evenings, a resting place for fog, where the hands of Cleary's Clock told us we were late, and on the street below, by the blaze of a big shop window, romance had its ebb and flow. Eros met his Aphrodite. We think of, we think of crusades belonging to that medieval period in history. But I think crusades, we still live in an age of crusades, religious wars, and the wars of attrition that seem to be going on and on. This poem I had been working on this, and it was after the atrocities in Paris before Christmas that I sort of concluded it. Crusades. Every day the war continues. the war for peace, the war that leaves a stain on holy books and breaks the laws made in heaven. Every day the war continues. Every night it is there on the screens, the bombed-out temple, the pavement cafe in smithereens, street life interrupted, the rebels with their faces covered. Every day the war continues. Those in command stay out of the picture. They have martyrs and armies to do their bidding. No one is willing to lay down arms, not the troops in desert boots, or the ideologist disguised as one of us. Tomorrow he might add another atrocity to the list, one that takes a minute's work, begets 1,000 years of blood. And I'll finish. I'll finish with another song of elsewhere, I suppose, a poem about the Mississippi River, which is one section from a long sequence of poems written after spending some time in the American Midwest. Mississippi. The local river carries its name from one end to the other, from the lake in the north to the delta in the south. Passing through the land of God, the first stranger it meets is the devil, learning to swim, plunging in but keeping away from the christening pool. Sometimes it turns to mud in the muddy creek, or breaks loose to seek the governor's mansion on the way to Baton Rouge. In its waters there are bones, there is blood. There are towns that need it, and towns it washes away in a punishing flood. Little has changed since the slave looked at it and saw freedom, since an image of the river was painted to hang in the county museum. The local river knows the lonely despair of the loner and the light of transfiguration, light that shows the poverty of trees when they are out of season. Thank you all very much for coming and for listening.
Questions. Gerard, I noticed over the years that you, Bob Dylan appears to occupy a situation of totemic significance for you. And Tomica, I know that you're a great admirer of Leonard Cohen's work. So I'm wondering, and you alluded to Serge Gainsbourg and Martha Reeves and that reading. I'm wondering, does the lyrics, the forms of popular music have any influence or effect on your writing?
Yes. It's an age thing. I think my friends have all this view, my contemporaries. We were lucky with that generation in the 60s of singer-songwriters. I think I was asked one time, the question, are they, well, all still around, most of them are, were they poets? I think I answered it by saying that they aspired to the condition of poetry. I mean, some of them got it. Cohen was a poet and works extremely well on the page. I think I wrote a long essay in the Irish Times making the case that Dylan was America's contemporary Whitman, that pushing everything, into the box. And yes, I mean, it was in the ether. You couldn't but absorb it. I don't know how many times I've been to see Dylan and look around and see writers,
Tomica?
I listen to a lot of music, so Cohen, of course, but he's very special. He's a very fine poet and a singer. And we have a lot of this in our years. We have a lot of fine, good music from all over the world, and I listen a lot. I sometimes have used parts of the music.